This is just rhythms, on their own. They don't actually, they don't mean anything. It's just music, Right. A talking drum, you determine the tones of this drum by the tension of the hand on the drum. You press the top like this with your wrist. If you just pull the string like this, you just cut the strings. So what you do is help the fingers with the wrist. In fact, without pulling the string at all, I can compress with my wrist without pulling with my fingers at all. This, see. Then if I pull hard and use my wrist at the same time, like I can sing something. Let me get it right now. Do you recognize that? It's not very perfect, but at least you could see how much tunes you can get from the talking drum. There are certain people whose ears are trained, like people born in the family of drummers. And if you understand the drum, you just tell him what to do with the drum. If you don't want your visitor to know, like saying, Loki or Emiwa, go and greet my friend for me. Is what I can say. You just call him. If his name is Tunji, you say Tunji, he will answer you. Then you say, he will understand. They are scattered in such a way that one drummer can hear the other wherever he is, all over the town. One drummer, the distance is not too long, too far away from each other, so that one can hear the other drummer if he announces that somebody has just come, a stranger has just entered the city. The other drummer will pick it up, then the next drummer will pick it up, the next one will pick it up until it gets to the king's palace. When it gets to the Oba's palace, they send out people to look for the...
Well, it's generally assumed that American popular music, and black music in particular, comes from Africa. And since most people associate drum music with Africa, it must have been drums that the slaves brought with them when they came to America in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is the traditionally accepted view of the origins of American popular music.
And here's one of the problems, because drum music is really rather elementary in Afro-American music, and of course a great deal of blues has no drums at all. The majority of the blues tradition never used drums. So that to relate it to drums seems to me to be oversimplistic.
In the slave period, moreover, drums were forbidden because the plantation owners realized that drums could be used to send messages. The confusion really starts with the careless use of the word Africa. After all, Africa is over 3 times the size of the entire North American continent. So it would seem sensible to identify those areas from which most of the slaves came. But again, we've been misled. It's generally assumed that most of the slaves came from the rainforests along the coast of West Africa. But the closest links between African music and American popular music are to be found not in the rainforests, but in the savannah, which is a few hundred miles north of the rainforest, in which there are drum traditions, but where the dominant instruments are not drums, but stringed instruments. The savannah, which used to be called the Western Sudan, besides the stringed instruments, you also find shawms, something like clarinets. You find primitive trumpets and trombones and flutes. Most important is the fact that the horns are used as talking instruments, using the inflections and sounds of speech to convey meaning. we divest ourselves of the myth that black American culture originated in the drum-dominated rainforests along the coast, therefore, but look again, we begin to find in the savannah all sorts of instruments which look and sound familiar. The banjo, for example. Thomas Jefferson, in his Notes on a Virginia Plantation, actually describes the making of a banja, which was in fact the African instrument the banya, being modified into the North American banjo. What you have to remember is that the tribes along the coast, like the Ashanti and the Yoruba, were in fact the slave traders. It was they, and not the white man, who raided the north, the savannah, and sold their fellow blacks to the white entrepreneurs. The people from the rainforest never did provide the majority of the slaves that were sent to the United States.
The reason that the Africans were brought here is basically economic. The whole need for cheap labor, slave labor, production of cotton crop, indigo, tobacco, sugar cane, and there's more and more of the kind of threads that connect us to Africa in the sense of thinking of that as our home. You know, the generation after generation that passes, when you begin to relate to, you know, the place you're at, and then people who have no real direct memory of Africa. And what happens is the destruction of all the threads that actually would make them want to go back. For instance, the first line was that if you were converted to Christianity, you could get free.
Almost 2 million slaves were shipped from West Africa to the United States by the time of the Civil War. Today, of course, there are about 25 million blacks, so the link in terms of music becomes even more tenuous. After all, the blacks were expected to assimilate white culture, yet remain separate from it. They were expected to accord to white standards and white conditions. Their music, such as was permitted, was expected to be no more than a black imitation of white music.
Walk together, children! Walk together, there's a great camp meeting in the promised land.
The jigs and reels which they played at country dances were little more than black versions of white folk themes. Spirituals, for instance, were black versions of white Protestant hymns. In fact, every attempt was made to force the slaves to forget their origins.
They had to learn a new language, new modes and mores, new styles of dress. They had to relate to an essentially white and European-based culture and become a part of it. So in the process, a great deal of Africa was lost, had to be lost. In order to live, it had to be lost.
Such elements of African culture as did survive, moreover, had to take their place alongside a mountain of other influences, most of which were European and white.
Rock-a-bye, baby, oh, go you to sleep. Your father is over the sea. When he has finished counting his sheep, he'll be in dreamland with thee. Soon o'er the waves he will sail to his fold. Maybe he'll bring you a necklace of gold. Rock-a-bye, baby, oh, go you to sleep. Your father is over the sea. Of course, this is folk music, the forerunner of what we call country music today. In other words, this is primitive country music. This is very close to the type of music that our forefathers brought from across the ocean when they came here. So that would be the very beginning, the British ballads that came into this country. And then following those would be early American folk songs that were still British because we were British then. A good example, of course, would be Springfield Mountain, which we call Rattlesnake Mountain in this country, which is a song about a fellow that went out and was bit by a rattlesnake. And his girlfriend came up to suck the blood out. And she sucked the poison blood out, and we didn't know it in this country. But in the old song, it was written in, or it wasn't even written, it was put together in Massachusetts during colonial days. And in the old version, she had a bad tooth. So she got some of the poison in the bad tooth, and they both died. Now, by the time that song came over 1,000 miles across from the Smokies to the Ozarks, it had changed. And instead of them both dying, they lived happily ever afterwards. On a rattlesnake me-why mountain, I did dwee-why well, and I heard a stee-why story. I'm gonna tee-why tell, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Oh, a nice young me-why man in the month of a me-why May went down to the fee-why field for to mow his a he-why hay, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. He had not a mow-why woed around the fee-why field till a rattle come a snee-why wake and a bit him on the he-why heel, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. He jumped up a he-why high and looked all a ree-why round, then he closed his pee-why eyes and fell to the gee-why ground, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Oh, Johnny D.Y. dear, why did you go? Why go into the fee-why field, the hay for the mow-why woe, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Oh, Sally D.Y. dear, I thought you'd know I knowed when the hay gets a ree-rye-rye bits, I got to be mow-why woe, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Oh, Johnny D.Y. dear, I'll save your lee-why life if I may be-why be your sweet little wee-why wife, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. She grabbed his lee-why leg and made him squee-why squeal and sucked the poison blood all out of his he-why heel, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Come, all young me-why men, and a warning T-why take, don't ever get B-why bit by rattle copper snee-why wake, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. When a rattlesnake B-why bites, it hurts like a knee-why knife. When a woman B-why bites, you're bit for the rest of your life, come-a-roo-die-roo-die-roo. Now, that was put together in colonial times, and they say the old words, which I've not seen, says that he went out to mow his hay and was bitten by a poison serpent. The language was a little different then.
With the end of the Civil War, which was, after all, fought at least in part to free the slaves, the South entered on a period of reconstruction, initiated by the politicians of the North.
What they hoped and promised was 40 acres and a mule for every freed slave. And they also promised them the vote. However, of course, they were quite unprepared for both, unprepared to cultivate their own farm, unprepared to take the franchise. And this made them prone to the carpetbaggers from the north who manipulated the black vote and caused considerable stress in the south.
Black people were segregated to a far worse degree than anything which had occurred even under the plantation system. Most of the states introduced black codes.
My baby outdrove me from
In some states, Negroes were not even permitted to travel unless they had a permit. And many of the Jim Crow laws date from this time. The segregation of blacks from whites on the railroads. The Ku Klux Klan was originally formed to suppress Catholics, but now it was directed against the Negroes. In other words, in many ways, the blacks were far worse off after the day of emancipation than they had been before. Nonetheless, the oppression had one startling effect. It caused the awakening of a black identity, because until that time,
the Negro population was dependent to a very large extent upon the white population for its language and was supported and looked after, probably in a very tough way under slavery, but still nevertheless looked after as property, as chattels. Now, in a sense, they had to find their own identity and their own way of life, and also their own culture.
And so, from about 1880 onwards, you see an extraordinary flowering of black music, almost in defiance of white society, a pride, if you like, in black nationhood, the beginnings of black power. The most popular white music of the time was that of the Sousa-like military bands, you find a primitive imitation of that. Although quite soon, blacks developed their own complex and sophisticated and utterly original music, akin to military band march music, but no longer mere imitation. It was first played on the piano, and it came to be known as ragtime. Was exuberant and joyful and celebrated the emergence of a black race who now hoped to share in the opening up of America. Ragtime also became one of the major influences in the development of jazz. And last, from the work songs of the cotton fields, came the form known as blues.
Going in the morning, if I don't be gone long, I'm going in the morning, boys, if I don't be gone very long. You know I'm gonna get my mojo in hand, I'm gonna bring it back home. That's what I'm gonna do.
Meanwhile, the old spirituals were abandoned because they were associated with slavery. In 1895, in Mississippi, the Reverend Mason established a new church, the Church of God in Christ. He too wanted a new music, more exciting and more exhilarating, more appropriate to this new black consciousness, and this was gospel music.
States, black music and black lifestyle has always been imitated. Like, you know, the minstrel show was making fun of black people. Paul Whiteman was the king of jazz. I remember Paul Whiteman, his first concert, he began the concert by first imitating a primitive jazz to let people know what this is now, how we have taken it and civilized it. We've industrialized it, you know, we've taken it. And you know, he was the king of jazz. And like Benny Goodman was the king of swing, it's, or for that matter, like the Rolling Stones are called the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Now, obviously, that's a political description. But if people want to understand America, the most forceful expression out of America will be the black music, and they will have to be able to judge it from there. I mean, even though, say, Elvis Presley is enormously popular and makes millions of dollars, you know, he's a very rich man, and expresses white popular music, there's no doubt where that comes from is the black belt South, black nation, black national expression.
God, my love, has got me on the run. Shuck it to the east, you brought it to the west. You got back home, I love the best. What you doing? Shaking that boogie. She was shaking the regular boogie. She was shaking that boogie.
So the question of exploitation of black artists, exploitation of black music, is a political question. And it will never be solved until this entire country, this society has some kind of socialist revolution. For instance, at the time I had a play opening, you know, and so everybody was coming, you know, say something about that play. You know, I remember Leonard Bernstein came up, he had tuxedo and stuff on, you know, and he wanted to do music for my play, and I thought that was really funny, you know. And so I asked him, well, why didn't he think that Duke Ellington could do that? I mean, if I wanted a big band or something, why wouldn't I get Duke Ellington? And I wanted to know, did he think that he was as great a musician as Duke? That's what I asked him. I said, do you think you're as good as a musician as Duke? I said, do you think you can play the piano as good as Duke? Do you think you're as great a composer as Duke? And finally I told him he couldn't even dress as well as Duke Ellington. So they got the government and we got the art. I'm sure that some people felt that having to dress up and present themselves like that did represent a compromise. Duke has said some things kind of bitterly about that. You know, dress up in a tuxedo and go play jungle music. And that's what the people were calling it, jungle music. And I think he took that with a bit of irony because he called it jungle music too. But the thing is, it's good jungle music. That's what they do, you know. I mean, that's the role of the bourgeoisie, the capitalists in the modern world, to package it up and sell it. You know, I mean, that's finally what they're interested in. What they can package up and sell it is bloods, black folks. You know, Motowns, Miracles, Supremes, you know, we can package it up and distribute it.
The big beat keeps you rocking in your seat. The big beat keeps you rocking in your seat. The big beat make you active with big leg do through his such weird.
What happened was that in the early 50s, white people began to pick up on black music through radio stations such as KLAC in Nashville, which broadcast on a clear channel to 20 states. The music of New Orleans and Delta blues spread around the country to white people. Young white college and high school students in the South started tuning into the black radio stations and becoming aware of Fats Domino and Joe Turner and Ray Charles. black music of today is becoming more like the pop music of yesterday is because little girls, little white girls, have a tremendous influence. They're a huge demographic factor in the buying of records and the setting of taste. They seem to buy a lot of the records. Now, a little white girl from suburban Scarsdale who might chance upon a big Bill Broonzy record and gets the image of this huge, threatening black man with a blue work shirt, all sweated at the armholes. It's very hard for her to make that sexual connection. So there was sort of a wall between the black people and this white audience. But in the early 60s, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, for example, is what it's called rock and roll today, particularly the Beatles, offered a very safe image in producing this music. The little white girl now could listen to the Beatles singing Bill Broonzy's song and find it quite acceptable because the sexual experience that this song was suggesting would be perfectly safe. The romance, or the eroticism, would gray out into this vague, either asexual or unisexual fantasy. There was no suggestion of violation or even consummation. Have ambitions to stretch them beyond the black market because the notion didn't exist. It was just a factual impossibility until the market itself invited you and said, yes, it can be done. And then, naturally, we tried to extend it. And of course, we made some mistakes. We made the mistake of trying to program the commercial pop compromise into the pure black music. And I shudder when I think back, when I listen to some of the things we did to some of those records in those days to make them in what we thought would be palatable to the white audience.
Only can make all this world see. darkness bright, only you and you alone can thrill me like you and fill my heart with love for only you. Can make this change in me, for it's true, you are my destiny.
For Mr. Dynamite, Mr. Out-of-Sight, the young man that became a legend in his own time. Soul Brother #1, James Brown, ladies and gentlemen.
Many black musicians wore an Uncle Tom mask. They had to in order to survive, they thought. It made them frustrated, it made them drunk, it made some of them monsters.
King of show business, the king of rhythm and blues, James Brown.
Prejudice killed. I mean, literally shriveled them up as artists. White people didn't get a chance to hear the best music. I mean, this is the real fact of the matter, because the prejudice applied to the booking agencies who didn't book black bands, the managers who were scared of having black customers, the white musicians who resented the competition from black musicians, the unions who very often catered to the worst prejudices of the majority of their membership.
We have worked this country from shore to shore. Our women cooked all your food and washed all your clothes. We picked all your cotton and laid the railroad steel. Worked our hand to the bone at your lumber mill. I say, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We fought in your wars in every land to keep this country free, all women, children, and men. We've been separated from a language we knew, stripped of our culture. People, you know it's true. Tell me now, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we ever be proud of my country till the be? When will we be paid? Will we ever say out loud, sweet land of liberty? When will we be paid?
I can't tell you how many famous people made fortunes out of the ignorance of black composers. The record business found that it was quite possible to make money, particularly when the artist would sell rights to tunes for either a bottle of gin or $1, which very often happened. So we're reaping a harvest of resentment and anger. And when you find us having problems when we go up to Harlem nowadays, we've asked for it by generations of neglect.
In a sense, the music has now come full circle. It began as the expression of black nationhood, not a leftover from Africa, not a black imitation of white culture, but something uniquely American and uniquely black. In order to gain wide acceptance, however, the music and its performers had to compromise, had to appear white, had to become once again a black version of white culture. In order to remain the expression of a black community, therefore, it has had to try and establish links with Africa, which, like the drum connection, were never really there in the first place. And it's made the painful discovery that much of the popular music of emerging black Africa today, here in West Africa, seems to be merely a strident imitation of white rock music.
Listen, you can't blame some of them for wanting to get back to Africa, where they believed their music had come from, and to escape what the white music industry had done to them.
In New York, for instance, if a guy is working at Roseland and needs a haircut or a shave and can't go to any barbershop in the neighborhood but has to go back to Harlem, how do you think he'd feel? And if he wanted to eat and eat well, and all he could eat at was a cafeteria, I mean, how would you feel? I mean, they just felt as if they were spit upon. And they were angry.
Fascination for Africa remains. Black and white musicians make the pilgrimage back to Africa with monotonous regularity, because despite its apparent excitement, when American popular music, and black music in particular, ceased to be the expression of the black community and became the expression of white youth community from Tokyo to Jakarta to Liverpool to New York, it ceased to have validity and meaning.
from Africa, and sort of our attitudes and our way of life sort of stems from the African way. And I think like this sort of, I'm only speaking now like from something I haven't really looked into, but I get that Africans are sort of very lazy people. They're not very aggressive. They just sort of want to live off the land and live very comfortable, which is great if you can do that, if you're in a position to be able to do that. But I felt that they enjoyed our performance there, but I have to be inspired by something when I go to Europe. I enjoy it because the people there are very fashionable, and it's just fun. I mean, all we do is work. We check in a hotel, and we go on stage, and we go to the airport. So you have to feel some kind of inspiration from a city, right? So when I go like to Africa, I'm very down because like the food isn't good. I don't get any really good, fantastic vibes from the people, so I'm just really bored.